Hello everyone! For today's movie review, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about 1971's The Andromeda Strain, directed by Robert Wise and based on a book by Michael Crichton. The film gives an account of the 4 days following the landing of a satellite in Piedmont, New Mexico, which unleashes an unknown virus that kills all but 2 of the town's inhabitants, an old man and a baby. Covertly, 4 high-profile experts, 3 scientists and a medical doctor, are brought to an underground facility in the desert to study the satellite, the survivors, and the virus. They must be careful to avoid exposure and to prevent leaks, however, lest they trigger the facility's atomic self-destruct feature. I believe I've mentioned once or twice before that this is one of my mom's favorite movies. Not every one of her favorite movies has a line that she likes to quote a lot, but this one does.
The air is thick with Andromeda.
That line comes up in and out of context. We might be talking about the movie, we might be talking about an airborne pathogen, or we might be talking about the weather. If someone says something like, "Ugh, it's really humid outside today, the air is heavy and thick," she'll say, "The air is thick with Andromeda." As for me, my favorite line is in this scene.
Please answer the following questions, yes or no.
Every now and then, I have to let out a little cantankerous ragweed pollen.
Okay, I'll repeat it for your memory cells.
Please repeat your response for our memory cells.
Ragweed pollen.
The Andromeda Strain stars Arthur Hill, James Olsen, David Wayne, and Kate Reed as the 4 experts whisked away to the desert. There are also key supporting performances from Paula Kelly and George Mitchell. The screenplay was adapted by Nelson Gidding, not the only screenplay of Gidding's that was filmed by Robert Wise. He also wrote the adapted screenplay for 1963's The Haunting and the screenplay for 1975's The Hindenburg. Gidding's screenplay for this film was adapted from the 1969 novel, The Andromeda Strain, by Michael Crichton, who makes a cameo appearance here as a surgeon in an operating room. I've read the book. I have it here somewhere. Here it is. I read the book back in 2018. Actually, I started it a few years before that, got a few chapters in, wasn't feeling it, stuck a bookmark in it, and left it on the shelf where from time to time I would glance at it and say, "Ooh, I should get back to that and finish it." Then 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 years later, I picked it up again and ended up speeding through it in just a couple days. I think I had recently seen the movie when I started the book, so maybe that had something to do with why I had a little trouble getting into it the first time. I was like, I know every single thing that's gonna happen here. This is kind of, it kind of blunted the edge of the book. As far as how the film compares as an adaptation, I can't speak on that with any authority because I did read it back in 2018. It's been several years now. But I do remember thinking things, yeah, that little hesitation there, that was me being like, what year is it? Are we in 2023 yet? But I do remember thinking that things in the book happened just like they did in the film. And watching the film, again, this past week, I recalled reading certain parts and conversations and thinking, hey, the movie followed this dialogue verbatim. So I think my main takeaway was that the film followed the book very closely. It was very good adaptation. And I do apologize if I just annoyed anyone by waving the book around and catching the light with the embossed silver writing. It is quite shiny. And now here's the fun part of the show where you get to watch me struggle to put the book back on the bookshelf. This is always fun. Hey, does anybody want me to review Jurassic Park? Because I've got a copy here. It's my other Michael Crichton book. I would totally be down for reading this again. It's been a while. Ooh, there's a bookmark in this book. I got this book used at a library book sale several years ago. Everything happened several years ago. But I didn't know that there was... Cool. Sorry. Hey, Weaselberry, you're filming a video right now. Pay attention. Now you get to watch me struggle to put two books back on the bookshelf. both times I've seen the Andromeda Strain, I've had the same experience. It starts out and it's kind of slow, kind of dry, kind of technical, but it pulls you in with this unsettling premise and takes you on this interesting and kind of frightening journey, and things begin to develop and the situation escalates, and then you have this intense final act, and by the time it's over, you're like, wow, that was really stressful. The Andromeda Strain works because it's good science fiction.
Well, I never went in much for science fiction.
And because it's a good thriller. Cerebral, but chilling. There's a pervasive feeling of dread and an air of creepiness from the very beginning. Buzzards circling above the town in the dark hint at the presence of death, but we don't yet see the carnage for ourselves. We just hear about it long distance as the nervous voices over the radio grow more distressed. Then there's a terrified yell and an ominous silence. It's later, as Dr. Stone and Dr. Hall arrive in Piedmont to check it out, that we see the bodies strewn everywhere, as if people just dropped dead right where they stood, while a few others had only enough time to go insane and kill themselves. It's alarming and gruesome, despite the puzzling absence of blood. Dr. Hall latches onto this oddity, and in one of the most disturbing scenes, cuts a victim's wrist to reveal that the blood has clotted and turned to powder. And that's exactly the face that I make when I watch that scene. The film's intensity and sense of urgency preys upon natural fears we all have in common. Fear of a mystery virus with a devastatingly high mortality rate, fear of a nuclear detonation and its short and long-term consequences, fear that the organizations we've put our trust in may be up to something nefarious. It's not the main point of the film, but certain characters do voice doubts and suspicions about the true origin of the virus, whether its arrival was really accidental, whether the government was hoping all along for an opportunity like this, whether their intent is to stop the virus from spreading or to use it to develop a biological weapon. It's mainly through Drs. Mark Hall and Ruth Levitt that these doubts and criticisms are voiced. Though Dr. Dutton expresses gloomy misgivings, both he and Dr. Stone, who is the group's leader, are more in the know, leaving the other two, our viewpoint characters, to ask pointed questions. Dr. Ruth Levitt is cranky and sarcastic, fed up before she even gets there, and blunt with her objections, while Hall is a misfit because he's an MD, not a scientist, and he's more interested in treating his two patients, not experimenting on them. His role as an outlier in the group is further emphasized by his designation as the odd man, the required unmarried male in fulfillment of the odd man hypothesis. From a storytelling point of view, especially if it's a story where you're going to have to provide a lot of exposition or introduce some foreign concepts, it's always useful to have a main character who's in the dark. Or in this case, one who's in the dark, and one who protests just about every order. These two ask the questions, and we get the answers we need. The film does a good job clearly explaining everything that is happening or is going to happen, so that the audience, including those of us in the back for whom science wasn't our favorite subject, can keep up. Now, whenever I take a gander at Robert Wise's filmography, it amazes me. Not just because the films he directed represent such different genres, but because I don't think of them as having many stylistic qualities in common. I've covered a few Robert Wise films in the past several months. I talked about his early career as a film editor working for Orson Welles and how he became a director under Val Lewton's supervision, and then at the other end of his career, I reviewed his work on Star Trek The Motion Picture. When you watch multiple films by one famous director, you look for similarities, preferences, personal touches that distinguish that director's work as his own. They're easy to find with some directors, but since I started paying attention, I've had a hard time learning just what Robert Wise's trademarks are, to the point that I've wondered if maybe he doesn't have any. Not every director does. Maybe he just made quality films that were each great in their own way. Certainly the Andromeda Strain has a particular style. Early on, I noticed the recurrence of a unique kind of shot in which a close-up of someone or something would fill one half of the frame, while someone or something else some distance away would stay in focus on the other half of the frame. I had a feeling this was something special, but not being an expert on cameras and photography and those kinds of things, I wasn't sure what this effect was, so I called it split focus. And I did an image search to find out if that was the right name, and look at the results I got. Here are some stills from Star Trek the Motion Picture, here's one from The Haunting, here are two from the Andromeda Strain. I think I'm onto something. So, using my search engine like a reverse dictionary, I looked up one of the terms I had seen here, split focus lens, and the first thing I found was a very helpful page about the split diopter shot on a site called Studio Binder. I'll put a link in the description, and it explained that use of a split diopter lens allows two subjects at different distances to be in frame simultaneously. A split diopter lens is a piece of half-convex glass that affixes to the main lens of the camera. This makes half the lens nearsighted, while the other half remains farsighted. This creates the illusion of a deep focus. The item that separates this shot from a traditional deep focus is that there is no continuous depth of field. The audience can still see the space between the two objects is out of focus. The benefits, according to Studio Binder, are that you can include more information in the one shot, emphasize the relationship between the two subjects in focus, and, quote, create a sense of uneasiness in the viewer. So there you go, it's an example of less is more filmmaking. It's creative, it's informative, and it's kind of creepy. Based on the examples I've come across, the split focus diopter shot is most associated with directors Brian De Palma, Steven Spielberg, and Robert Wise. Another stylized feature of the Andromeda Strain is its occasional use of split screens, a feature that enjoyed some popularity in the late 60s and 70s. The split screen comes up intermittently, occurring most memorably in the sequence where Stone and Hall discover the bodies, frozen in time as it were, and in the scene where the characters take a break to rest, the screen splitting to represent what they're dreaming about or meditating on. Still, another creative choice is the frequent and precise reminders of time and location, placed at the bottom center of the screen where you can't miss them, reinforcing the story's time-sensitive nature and grounded tone. This is science fiction presented as fact, not in the corny way that you see in some older films like, say, The Giant Claw, which I reviewed recently, but in an extremely sober manner, handling the subject matter seriously and without exaggeration, assuming the audience's intelligence and ability to keep up, and maintaining such a strong foothold on reality that it's not incredible that something like this could happen. There are also special effects involved, again, not in a flashy way, but in a way that helps ground the film and keep it realistic. A lot is done with computer graphics and microscopic images. Robert Wise and company had to find a way to make something so small that it's invisible to the naked eye have a frightening and even malevolent presence, and I think they succeeded. One of the people who contributed to the visual effects in the Andromeda Strain was Douglas Trumbull, who later worked with Wise on Star Trek the Motion Picture. Douglas Trumbull passed away just this past February. Someone else who worked with Wise on both films was Richard H. Klein, director of photography. I like the drive to Wildfire, located in Flat Rock, Nevada, which reminds me of a similar scene in 77's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the government has dumped thousands of dollars into covering their tracks, making the place look deserted and making the road absolutely miserable to travel on. Wildfire is disguised as a fully equipped and perfectly innocuous agricultural research station, but it's sitting on top of a 5-story state-of-the-art lab. Everything about this is cool. The disguise, the trip down, the cylindrical design that gives you these almost surreal curved hallways, the color coding on each level, the cold sterility, and the automated convenience that isn't always so convenient. This underground lab is embedded in rock with a nuclear device at the bottom of the whole structure, so in case of biological emergency, a virus leak, you've got 5 minutes and then boom. It's a fine instance of Chekhov's gun, the dramatic convention that if you place a loaded gun on stage, it must go off later in the play. If you make a point of including a nuclear self-destruct apparatus, it has to be triggered. On their way down, the characters undergo a long disinfection process, including intrusive, invasive, and at times awkward analyses and scans by computers, and some bizarre decontamination procedures involving nasty-looking muck, intriguing, sparkly helmets, and dangerous amounts of radiation. Their paper uniforms are discarded and incinerated with each descent to the next level. The whole thing gives you a prickly feeling. Some people might find these sequences a little slow, but I think they're very interesting. You've just got to watch with patience and a curious mind. Is it an exact representation of the procedures people would really have to undergo if this scenario were real in 1971? I don't know, but it sure is a fascinating process. It should also be mentioned that there are some animal testing scenes, and some viewers may find these upsetting. Though no animals were harmed in the making of the movie, a couple of these scenes are particularly distressing. Not gross. The movie's never gross. If you're curious why the virus gets dubbed the Andromeda Strain, the film acknowledges your question, but it doesn't really answer it.
Why Andromeda?
Andromeda's our
Stone.
So you're left wondering if it's a nod to the constellation, the galaxy, or the character from Greek mythology. Probably no one thinks of this as a funny film, and I'm not saying that I do. However, there are some very humorous moments. Kate Reid's feisty delivery of her lines is entertaining and relatable.
I have risked drowning in that foul bath. I have been parboiled, irradiated, and xenon flash. And now you suggest
I have to.
And Dr. Hall gets a little sassy, flirting with the overly attractive computer voice.
We wish you would adopt a more serious attitude, Dr. Hall.
Sorry, her voice is quite luscious.
Maybe these moments strike me as being so amusing because the tension in the rest of the thing is so high. Here's this little break where you get to laugh for a second, and perhaps that relief makes the moment seem even funnier than it is. Not that the Andromeda Strain has me rolling on the floor laughing. I take this film very seriously. But it's these very human quirks that help make it an even more enjoyable movie. It's a film that requires you to watch it with your brain turned on, but not because it's esoteric, inaccessible, or abstract. It's smart, but not exclusionary. It's thorough and deliberate, but not tedious. It's not an action-heavy thriller, but it is tense and suspenseful. The threat ramps up exponentially with each new discovery, each layer of understanding they reach about the virus, leading to a climactic race against the clock to prevent a disaster of massive proportions. By the way, they did come out with a TV miniseries adaptation of the Andromeda Strain back in 2008, starring Benjamin Bratt and Ricky Schroeder. I saw some of it on TV, but I couldn't really get into it, and I was turned off by all the bombastic stuff they added, so my recommendation is that you stick with the 71 film. Those are my thoughts on the Andromeda Strain. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you've seen this film, I'd love to hear what you think of it, so go ahead and share your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll be back next week with another review. Thanks for watching.